So, good morning. I want to talk today about how freedom is in the gift. And this is a statement that really resonates with the Buddhist teachings because it reveals a fundamental truth about the nature of freedom and the path to greater freedom. Because in Buddhism, the act of giving, the dana is the Pali word, represents far more than just charity. It's a transformative practice that reduces the suffering of both the giver and the receiver. And this may, at first glance, sound paradoxical. How do we gain by giving something up? How do we gain by losing? How do we become free by releasing what we possess? But this apparent contradiction lies at the heart of the Buddha's wisdom. Because remember, he taught that suffering arises from attachment, clinging, and craving. When we cling tightly to possessions, relationships, even our own self-concept, our own ego identity, we are creating the very chains that bind us and cause us suffering. And the gift here represents a conscious act of releasing these attachments, of letting go. Each time we give freely, whatever it is we're giving, without expectation of return or recognition, we are practicing the art of letting go. And the beauty of letting go is that it loosens the grip of the ego, because the ego constantly wants to be about me. It constantly wants to accumulate stuff. It constantly wants to protect my image. It constantly wants to define itself through what I possess, what I've achieved, and so forth. Buddhist teachings recognize three levels of giving, and I love how they break this down, each offering, as it's described, progressively greater freedom. The first one is the obvious one, material giving, sharing physical resources, food, clothing, money, shelter, gifts, that sort of thing. This is a form of giving which addresses immediate needs of the receiver. It also helps the giver recognize us. It also helps us as the giver recognize that there's no security in hoarding and holding on to stuff. And it reinforces this idea of interconnection, this web of mutual support between all of us. So that's material giving. The next one they call giving of fearlessness. And this is offering protection, comfort, reassurance to those who are afraid, who are in dire circumstances, who are suffering in some way that we can help alleviate by coming in, protecting, offering guidance and protection. So that's the giving of fearlessness. The highest form of giving in the Buddhist world is the giving of the Dharma. This involves sharing wisdom, sharing the teachings, sharing spiritual guidance. You know, when we help others understand this path, we don't proselytize, but if they ask, if they come to us, if they get interested, we help them understand the path. When doing that, and this is what I love about teaching, because we deepen our own understanding and commitment to the practice. I get so much out of meeting with you twice a week, because by having to put together these talks and think about this stuff, it just has deepened my practice in immeasurable ways, and I'm so grateful for this opportunity. And so by sharing the wisdom of the Buddha, we deepen our own path, because we have to know what we're talking about a little bit in order to share it. So it gets us more deeply engaged with the Dharma. You know, remembering in terms of the notion of karma, that every intentional act creates consequences that shape our future experiences, cause and effect. And this generosity, in whatever form it takes of the three, we could call it positive karma or merit, but not in a transactional sense, not in the sense that, you know, I give you this, you give me that. Rather, it's the act of giving transforms our mind. It changes our view. It cultivates qualities like compassion, non-attachment, generosity, joy. There's a series of mythical tales in the Buddhist canon called the Jataka tales. They're mythical stories of the Buddha's supposed previous lives. And they illustrate frequently throughout them how acts of supreme generosity, and even to the point of giving one's life for others, leads to spiritual advancement in that worldview. And these stories teach that true giving requires no calculation of personal benefit. We don't do it just to see what we get back. The selfless attitude, they argue, yields the greatest freedom. The deepest freedom that comes through giving is the dissolution of this illusion of separation. It helps us see the interconnection. When we give genuinely, we experience the truth of this interconnection, the recognition that we're all interconnected in this vast web, overlapping web of relationships. And what happens then is this boundary between self and other, this ego reinforced boundary between self and other, begins to dissolve. And this is not a loss. This dissolution of this perceived autonomy, separateness, is not a loss. It's really a source of freedom. You know, the small, confined, ego-driven self that we all struggle with, it seeks its own advantage. When we engage in acts of generosity, gives way to greater spaciousness, a more expansive awareness that recognizes that suffering and joy, the suffering and joy of others, whatever it is inseparable from our own. And it is in this recognition that lies freedom. Not the freedom to do whatever we want, not that kind of ego-driven freedom, but the freedom from the tyranny of self-centeredness. The amount of suffering that comes from our self-centeredness and self-absorption is immense. And perhaps the most profound gift that we can give in that regard, and we can offer to someone else, is our full presence and attention. You know, in the world in which we live with constant distractions, giving someone our undivided awareness is increasingly rare, and I would suggest increasingly precious. When we listen deeply to someone without judgment, without the need to fix or advise, we give them the space to be themselves fully. I mean, what a wonderful, we've talked about this recently. We all desperately long to be seen and heard, and to give someone that gift is immense. And this gift of presence, when we can offer that, also frees us from the compulsion to constantly assert our own views and our own opinions, all originating in the ego's need to dominate, to win, to prevail, to self-aggrandize. So let me be clear though, this path of generosity, this path is not without challenges, because we bump up against the ego mostly. You know, we take pride in our generosity, we pump ourselves up, which really corrupts the purity of the gift. You know, we get attached to being seen as generous. We get attached to being seen as, you know, the selfless person. You know, we often experience resentment when our gifts aren't appreciated. Often we give it with strings attached, like, I'll give it to you, but you sure as heck better appreciate me. We also deal with the fear of not having for ourselves. If I give you this, I might be without whatever it is. Each of these obstacles are an opportunity for deeper practice. They are cues to look at what's going on with us, look at what's going on with the ego, and let go. Because they reveal where we still cling and where further letting go is still needed. You know, in the Mahayana Buddhist tradition, we've talked about this in the past, there's this notion of the bodhisattva ideal, which represents the ultimate expression of this notion that freedom is in the gift. Because in the Mahayana tradition, bodhisattvas are those beings which vow to postpone their final liberation until all beings are free from suffering. You know, the supreme gift, the dedication of all of one's spiritual merit for the benefit of others, is sort of the pinnacle of freedom in the Buddhist world through generosity. So freedom is in the gift. That statement points to a way of being in the world that is really characterized by a continuous flow of giving rather than stagnation, rather than just sitting with the ego. You know, it's sort of like a stream that, or a river, we've talked about that metaphor, that remains fresh by constantly flowing. You know, this practice, it reminds us that we find freedom not in accumulating and holding on, but in the continuous movement of giving and receiving, the freedom that is available in each moment. And little acts of generosity, just a kind word, a helping hand. You know, there's a whole gamut of ways we can practice this gift giving. Every interaction with another person offers an opportunity to give, as I just said, a smile, a kind word, our full attention, our understanding, our non-judging, and on and on. Because in these countless small acts of generosity, we are really practicing the freedom that the Buddha talked about. The freedom that comes not from having more, but from being more generous, more open, more connected, more alive to the inexhaustible richness of each moment, in the moment. In this understanding, the gift becomes not just a path to freedom, but the very expression of freedom itself. When we give from this place of freedom, we manifest the boundless nature of our true being. It's unlimited by these artificial boundaries that the ego erects of self and other, the separation. So this is the profound teaching hidden in plain sight within the simple phrase, freedom is in the gift.